Some key moments from yesterday during her testimony were her identifying over a dozen escorts that she had made contact with, 4 combs that had participated in various sexual encounters.
She's doing well. She had a restful night. She's ready for cross-examination, and we're very confident that she's going to do perfectly.
So, today in court, the defense definitely made some headway. In fact, you could say they kind of owned the day. They spent the entire time cross-examining Cassie, and their main goal was crystal clear: to paint a picture of everything that happened. Especially the so-called freakoffs was fully consensual. That's the heart of their strategy, because for at least one of the major charges, whether or not there was consent is the deciding factor. Now, here's where it gets really complex. Cassie took the stand and said there were times she didn't want to participate in these acts, but she never really communicated that clearly to Diddy, not even in subtle ways. And that matters, because when the jury gets instructions, one of the big legal questions will be, did she make it known that she didn't consent? And just to be clear, this isn't about defending Diddy. Some of the stuff Cassie described in court was deeply disturbing. So, what exactly did the defense do today? Well, they brought out receipts starting with a text message from back in 2009, just a year after Cassie and Diddy got together. In it, she says she loves freakoffs. That's early in the relationship. But then, they pulled out another message from 2017. That's 8 years later, way deep into their relationship. In that one, Cassie writes something along the lines of, "I love our freakoffs when we both want it." Now, that last part, it opens the door to a really important point. What if there were times she didn't want it? That nuance is key. Cassie responded in court saying those were just words by then, which raises a whole other set of questions. Like, was she saying it just to keep the peace? Out of habit? But the defense didn't stop there. They also presented love letters, not literal handwritten ones, but texts exchanged between Cassie and Diddy. And yeah, they sounded like classic love notes, saying they missed each other and wanted to be with each other. Cassie also admitted to feeling jealous, especially of Kim Porter and other women Diddy was involved with. She said she wanted to be the main person in his life. Now here's the moment that will really catch us off guard. Cassie revealed that while she was dating Kid Cudi, she was still doing freakoffs with Diddy. The defense asked her flat out why she was doing that, and she said, "It was my job." It raises a whole other level of complexity. What did she mean by that? Was she talking literally, like, as in it was part of her role being signed to his label? Or was she referring to the power dynamics and expectations that had built up over the years? The defense hasn't fully explored that yet, but let's really hope they do, because that line could mean a lot of different things, and the jury's interpretation of it could be huge. The defense is making their case, and they definitely scored some points. You know, some people are jumping to conclusions about Cassie saying, "It's my job." There's this online chatter suggesting that meant she was being paid for those freakoffs. But there's no evidence backing that up. No receipts, no mention of money changing hands. If that were the case, the defense would have jumped on it hard and made it part of their core argument. But they didn't. So for now, what "it's my job" actually means is still kind of a mystery. Was it emotional, or was it something unspoken in their power dynamic? We just don't know yet. And speaking of rumors flying around online, there's this wild one that the baby oil Diddy used was somehow laced with drugs meant to incapacitate Cassie and other women. But Cassie herself testified flat out, there were no drugs in the baby oil. That claim originally came from one of the civil suits, and maybe it sounded shocking enough to gain traction online. But in court, Cassie shut that down. Another incident that happened in court was disturbing. Jury found out that Diddy sent Cassie a text. "Let's do a freak-off," and Cassie replied that she is ovulating. That's subtle but strong. She didn't say no, but what does "I'm ovulating" imply in that context? She's not looking to risk pregnancy, clearly doesn't want sex, at least not with any kind of intercourse involved. And Diddy responded with, "Well, what if we just kiss?" She agrees, but what followed was a freak-off that reportedly lasted over 10 hours. Now here's where it gets tricky. No one, not the defense or the prosecution, asked what happened during those 10 hours. They didn't get into the specifics. That's a huge missed opportunity, because if there was intercourse after all that, you could argue Diddy softened her resistance by lowering the stakes. Like, just a kiss? And then suddenly it's full-blown sexual activity with a third party? But that detail, it's left hanging, never explored. Another key angle the defense pushed was the idea that Cassie was actively participating in a swinger lifestyle. They wanted to frame it like this wasn't something being forced on her, but something she was part of. That's a slippery slope in front of a jury, especially when you're questioning a woman who's been through a lot. You come off too aggressive, and the jury could easily turn on you. But Cassie admitted it. She said they visited sex clubs. San Bernardino was mentioned and that she'd been there 2 or 3 times.
Some key moments from yesterday during her testimony were her identifying over a dozen escorts that she had made contact with, 4 combs that had participated in various sexual encounters in cities from LA, Miami, here in the city, and Vegas.
She even saw Diddy having sex with another woman and didn't walk out. That kind of detail adds complexity to the story. It doesn't erase coercion if it existed, but it shows there were times she engaged willingly, or at least didn't resist openly. Reading her testimony, even just the transcripts, she seems incredibly genuine. She's not trying to make herself look like a saint, but she's also not throwing wild accusations. She's measured. She's honest about when she felt uncomfortable, but she doesn't always pin that directly on Diddy saying, "He made me." She's not overreaching, and that makes her all the more believable. At the end of the day, the defense is trying to tell a different version of the relationship. One where Cassie wasn't a victim in every scenario, where there was love, affection, even passion at times. They're using her own texts, some pretty affectionate ones to make that point. Stuff like, "I love our freakoffs," when we both want it. So here's another thing. The prosecution allowed the full, unedited 2016 Intercontinental Hotel surveillance footage into evidence. This is the tape where Diddy is seen violently attacking Cassie. No edits, no cuts, just raw footage. Now this video is brutal, and honestly, it's going to be a serious hurdle for the defense to get around. They did try to address it in court, but their angle didn't work. They suggested Diddy was going through drug withdrawal at the time, both the day before and the day of the assault, as if that somehow explains or excuses what was captured on camera. They were basically implying, hey, he wasn't in his right mind, he was sick, going through withdrawal. But is that going to sit well with a jury? It came off more like an excuse than a legitimate explanation. Cassie herself responded by saying she didn't know anything about drug withdrawal, she just remembered him being sick. That's it. No medical drama, no deep dive into addiction. If there's any gray area, if jurors are unsure about whether Cassie is telling truth or not, she still gets the benefit of the doubt. Why? Because she's coming across as genuine. She's not dramatic, she's not exaggerating, and she doesn't force blame where she can't be sure. That honesty really lands. All right, now let's shift gears and talk about something we haven't really touched yet: racketeering. One of the charges in this case is that Diddy was operating a criminal enterprise. Now, let me say, this is rare. Usually you hear racketeering and you think mafia, gang syndicates, drug cartels, not one solo music mogul. But in this case, Diddy's the only person charged. The idea is that he was running a full-blown criminal operation all on his own. That's a bold claim. So what are they using to back it up? Well, partly these freakoffs. They're suggesting that even those events were orchestrated in a way that fits the pattern of organized crime. Like, his assistant booked the hotels, other staff set things up. But let's be honest, does that scream mafia to a jury? Now here's where things get really wild. The case touched on Kid Cudi. Cassie was seeing him for a while, and there's this long circulated rumor that after that, Cudi's car literally blew up. The word on the street? Diddy ordered it. They brought that into the trial. They asked Cassie about it. They talked about the car explosion. But she never quite sealed the deal with a "Diddy told me he did it" kind of moment. No smoking gun. Just a lot of implication. So again, it's one of those moments where the jury's left to connect the dots, but there's no direct confirmation. Still, the fact that it came up at all adds another layer to the portrait being painted here. One of control, intimidation, and maybe violence. There's still more to unpack, but this trial is heavy. There's also one more thing cleared that other witnesses are going to come in soon and might help the prosecution really tie everything together. We haven't quite seen that moment yet, but this was probably the first clear step toward laying out a racketeering case. So yeah, they're definitely building towards something. Now, stepping back a bit, everyone was saying that Cassie would be the slam dunk witness, the one who would seal Diddy's fate and leave no doubt. But honestly, it doesn't seem like playing out. She gave the prosecution a ton of ammunition, but this case isn't going to hinge on just her. There's more coming. Remember, this trial's set to go on for 6 weeks. We're just scratching the surface here. It's inevitable that Cassie's testimony was powerful. She described this moment where she didn't want to participate in one of the so-called freakoffs, and said she turned him down gently because she was scared of setting him off. That word, gently, is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. They didn't press her on what exactly she said, but even her saying no at all could really hurt Diddy in the eyes of the jury. Then there's the allegation that he raped her while she was dating Alex Fine, her now husband. She says Diddy showed up at her house and forced himself on her. Now, legally, that's a serious state-level crime, but it doesn't directly tie into the current federal charges. Still, it paints a damning picture of who he is and what he's capable of. So bottom line, Cassie's not the final nail in the coffin, legally speaking, but emotionally, she left a mark. She gave the jury a strong sense of who Diddy is behind the scenes. And let's be real, sometimes that kind of character exposure sticks harder than the facts. And that brings us to the video, the brutal 2016 surveillance footage from the Intercontinental Hotel, the one where Diddy beats Cassie in the hallway. That alone could be enough for some jurors. Even if it's not legally tied to every charge, that image is burned into their minds. The defense is trying to separate that incident from the freak-off allegations, saying the attack was about a phone Cassie was holding. But come on, assault is assault. That's domestic violence. And honestly, he's lucky he wasn't criminally charged for that alone. But let's talk about this jury for a second. Here's what's wild. They've been completely stoic. I mean, stone-faced. No emotion during some of the most intense graphic testimony. Juries in the past has been seen reacting or getting visibly uncomfortable. But not this group. They've been like statues. In fact, the sources said the jury actually looked bored during the defense's arguments, like they were zoning out a bit. That says a lot. So for now, the story's still unfolding. The prosecution's just getting warmed up. More witnesses are coming, more evidence is expected. And as for the jury, they're keeping their cards close. This case is far from over.